We're talking about the field of molecular paleontology. It's a new field, and it's dealing with the idea that with the latest nanotechnological techniques, electron microscopy, and so on, and other advanced microscopy techniques, second harmonic generation, standard chemistry to process these things, high resolution mass spectrometry, you can now look at into materials with an unprecedented field of view. And in about 1992, the largest T-Rex bone ever discovered was pulled out of a mountain in Montana. They had a helicopter to do it. It was a female dinosaur. They called it Sue. And it was taken to the museum, the university, where Dinosaur Jack, a name called Jack Horner, they called him Dinosaur Jack, and his PhD student Mary Schweitzer began to work on it. Mary was a trained paleontologist, so she knew what blood cells looked like, and as she looked at the specimens of Sue under the microscope, she was able to see red blood cells. She went to see her boss, Jack. There's red blood cells. No. And she was, I think the word poo-pooed, you don't know what you're talking about type of thing. There can't be red blood cells. These are millions of years old. You're not going to get red blood cells millions of years old. Jack, they're red blood cells. She does test after test after test. She's a very good scientist. And she's a very persistent scientist. Experiment after experiment. And yes, they're red blood cells. Hemoglobin. And then from that time, all of these chemicals, fragile chemicals that should not be there if they're old, have come to light. The field of molecular paleontology then is born. That was 1992, so we're now 30 years on, and there's more publications than ever in that area, and that's the area that I've been working in for the last 10 years. So, and it is powerful evidence for the biblical worldview. That is to say, that your Bible is true. Amen. And it's some scientific evidence. The Bible doesn't need scientific evidence to show that it's true. It's self-attesting. In some ways we could push aside the science and we could just speak from the Bible, and it would confirm, the Holy Spirit would confirm his own words in our hearts. But there is a place, Truth in Science believes, for evidential apologetics. What's that? It's just showing that the evidence, actually, the real world out there where people study and live in, the facts that we deal with in science actually confirm what the Bible has said all along. And that's the position that our group is in, trying to do our work at the University of Liverpool. And that is the position of Truth in Science, that there's an evidential aspect to the presentation of the truth. Some would call it apologetics. It's very, very similar in its position. So that's where we are, and that's who I am. So what can we learn from the dinosaurs? I'm going to present to you today evidence that supports the biblical worldview. We actually know quite a lot about dinosaurs. Oh, by the way, they did exist. I was sitting next to a Jewish man on the train coming out of the NEC a few months ago, and I always try and speak, if I can, to those from a Jewish background. To start a conversation with a Jewish person, shalom. Shalom. We come in peace. And I've never had that fail. Shalom, he said. Are you a Jewish? I said, no, but I'm a... And then we're off to a discussion. And I'm a Christian, but I do love the Tanakh, the Old Testament part of Scripture, but you don't use the word Old Testament. You just talk about the Torah. You talk about the terms that he's familiar with for his Bible, which we believe, of course. And he asked me what I did eventually. I told him I was a professor at the University of Liverpool. Our research is into dinosaurs at the moment. Dinosaurs? He said, well, I don't believe in those. And he did not believe that they were real. Really. He was some sort of financial bank manager or something like that. He had investments. He was on the phone, this one and that one, and well-to-do chap and everything. And And he didn't believe they were real at all. I was stunned. They are real. The problem is, the issue is the timescale. We know a lot about them, we know what happened to them, and we've got to see today how the facts fit with the Bible. Well, the first thing we know, I'm going to give you 7 facts which are non-controversial about the dinosaurs. Firstly, they died suddenly. Now, this is taken from the 11th of May 2022, so it's not so old. There's some fragments of amber on the left, and of course it is believed by the secular world that a big asteroid came, bang, and wiped out the dinosaurs. That's the current secular thinking. And you know what? They talk about the day. Sorry, go back. Oh, I'm not going back. I'll go. Here we are. They talk about the day that the dinosaurs died in the press. They believe in a sudden demise of the dinosaurs. Isn't that interesting? The Bible speaks about a day when God opened the windows of heaven. It really does. And the dinosaurs died. Not in one day actually, but over the flood year, those creatures, by and large, were wiped out, apart from the ones that were on Noah's Ark. They were everywhere, the dinosaurs. Now, this is just a shot of the US, but actually you could do the same thing for fossil graveyards in Africa, in China, in Europe. Researchers identified soft tissues over 5 out of the 7 major continents. And it's not, and the other 2 is just because it's not been explored very much. But there's soft tissues all over the world. And in the case of the USA, it's been well documented, that is a massive area. 1,800 miles by 1,000 miles. In Canada, down to Mexico, over 1 million square miles in 14 plus of your states where dinosaur remains have been found. That's the kill zone in the USA. I'm grateful to Dan Biddle from Genesis Apologetics for these slides. Let me acknowledge that. But I just think, wow, they were everywhere. And this is just the US dinosaurs. They were huge. Look at the size of the elephant. Look at the size of the man. This is the largest dinosaur discovered yet. It's just a clip. 69 metric tons. More than 10 African elephants, 122 feet, 37 meters long. It's Patagonian mayorum. That's the technical name. Argentinosaurus, a Titanosaur, a Diplodocus is the other name. Absolutely massive. And you find these things, to bury that requires a catastrophe of enormous proportions. To bury 4 of them in the same place requires something that's huge in terms of a cataclysmic event. A local flood of 10 meters, tragic what's happened in Pakistan, but that would not do this. It's something far greater to have fossilized those bones. And of course it's all research and it's all in the literature. They were buried catastrophically. In Alberta, fossil remains over 1 square mile of thousands of Centrosaurus. There's a Centrosaurus, according to the size of a man. Thousands of them wiped out. And the comment by the secular researcher, the scale of the carnage must have been breathtaking. This is not controversial stuff. This is agreed, this is accepted. In Dinosaur Provincial Park in Canada, we find dinosaurs alongside aquatic animals. Just take that in, will you? Dinosaurs alongside sharks and other aquatic animals. Fish, turtles, marsupials and amphibians. Question: how do dinosaurs and fish get buried with turtles? How do fish and turtles get buried with dinosaurs? There's water involved here. These are dinosaur tracks found on Dinosaur Ridge, Colorado, USA, For those, if there's anyone from that part of the country, its elevation is 1.82 kilometres high, over a mile high. And you find dinosaur tracks up there. You also find marine fossils much higher than that. In Everest, you find ammonites there in the foothills of Everest, which, as Paul Garner will tell us, is of course sedimentary rock at the top, rock that was once underwater. And if you go to the museums around the country, around the patch, you find the word flood coming up again and again. A herd of dinosaurs died in a flood or some other catastrophe. Massive flood events may have killed thousands of dinosaurs at one time. Hundreds of dinosaurs buried together with shark teeth. A large ancient flood, buried by flash floods, buried by a flood, catastrophic inundation, 100-yard wide flood deposit, flood, 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 flood. What do we find in the Bible? Behold, I myself, God personally speaking, emphasizing that it was himself. The flood, a word used 13 times in the Old Testament, Mabul, Hebrew, speaking of a cataclysmic event, the Mabul. 12 of those times are in Genesis. For your homework, you can find the other one for yourself. But the flood is what God brought. And it is that, we believe, that wiped out all the dinosaurs living at the time. Some were wiped out later and overhunted, the ones who got off the ark, but that's another story which I'll come to later. So there's 7 facts about dinosaurs. They died suddenly, they died catastrophically, they're found worldwide, they're buried in groups, they died in flood conditions, they died at high altitudes. Now, their bones contain soft tissues. What's a soft tissue? Let me show you a video of a soft tissue. See if I can do this.
What happened next happened by mistake. Mary put some fragments of the bone in acid to dissolve away the outermost layer of mineral. But the acid worked too fast and all the mineral dissolved away. Being a fossil, there should have been nothing left. But there was. And it was elastic, like living tissue.
This is the piece.
No. She showed us video she took under the microscope.
That's really what happened?
Yes.
That's the dinosaur bone?
Without mineral now. That's what was left.
It looked like the soft tissue she would have expected to find if it had been modern bone. This was impossible. This bone was 68 million years old.
So you see this and you think, what? You
I didn't want to tell anybody.
That you'd be ridiculed,
yes.
right?
And so I said to my technician, okay, do it again. I don't believe it.
And yet, in sample after sample, they were there. Things that looked suspiciously like flexible, transparent blood vessels. She finally mustered the courage to tell Jack. What happened?
So that's the technical issue there. So we get into a little bit of chemistry, a little bit of what's called molecular paleontology. Quote, it was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone. But of course I couldn't believe it. I said to the lab technician, the bones are after all 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long? That's a good question. And of course the answer is easy. They can't survive that long. But her paradigm, her thinking is so locked in to millions of years, which she regards as unassailable fact, that she can't get out of that loop. And that is the world of science in which we live. Millions of years is not even questioned. It's more or less like a pillar of the scientific establishment, and yet it doesn't fit with the science. And the science challenges the paradigm. Now, when a scientific fact challenges a scientific paradigm, what gives? The paradigm. It has to. Otherwise, the science ceases to be science. And when the facts run against the theories, facts, observable facts that are observable, repeatable, experimental facts, when they run against the theories, what has to give? Theories. And the other thing to say at this point is, in our church, of course, churches, by and large, the church in the UK and in the Western world, has swallowed the idea of deep time, millions of years, billions of years, and it's a myth. Amen. Biblically, there's no word for there's no leading at all in the Bible towards the idea of millions or billions of years. It just isn't there. It's an idea that's been imposed from outside, and the church, by and large, has accepted it. And as Andy pointed out many, many years ago, can revival come to a church which doesn't believe its own book? Can it really? We don't think so. And that's the issue here. And the reason I work in this area is, if we can kill the idea of deep time, we kill evolution, because evolution needs millions and millions of years. If there's no millions and millions of years, evolution cannot happen. And actually, where did the church in the Western world lose its way? It's when it accepted the idea of millions and billions of years in the geological record that we started to lose confidence in the several thousand years. Yes, I'm a Bishop Ussher man. 6,000 years before today, roughly, if you add up the genealogies. Won't argue about a few hundred years here and there. But that's what the church believed for 2 millennia. And that, I believe, is what we get back to, that we need to get back to. And actually, it's interesting, post-Reformation, biblical literacy and scientific progress go hand in hand. It will make you a better scientist to believe the truth, not a worse one. We must press on. So here we are. This is a paper from the Royal Society, published in, that's the UK top journal. And the basic point to look at here, these are all different dinosaurs. There's a T-Rex at 68 million years, conventional dating, a Triceratops at 65 million years, a bit younger, and a Brachylophosaur, 78 million years old. They all look the same. You don't have to be a genius to see this. They've all got hollow, supple vessels, bone cells and osteocytes. In other words, even on their own time scale, there's nothing changing here for 13 million years. Folks, it doesn't stack up. If they were all laid down at the same time, of course, it's exactly what you'd expect. Proteins, so blood cells are one thing, proteins are another thing. The DNA, very fragile molecule, and yet all of this stuff has been found, and some of it in our top journals, Nature, Bone, and so on. These data support preservation of multiple proteins, evidence for material consistent with DNA in dinosaurs. Our own work, this shows some imaging that we used using a technique called second harmonic generation, published in the literature. On the left is modern bone, significant collagen, that's the stuff that most of our bones are made of. On the right, a Triceratops bone, not significant, not lots of collagen, but some collagen, which proves that it's survived. Not possible over millions of years, easily explicable if they're not that old. Dinosaur skin, would you believe it? Well, that's published in 2019. And of course, the latest stuff this year published, mammoth genomes. People have been working on mammoths, and the record for the oldest DNA is now more than 1 million years old. On their time scale, DNA can't last 1 million years, but there's been found from remains. And of course, they still interpret those results saying, well, isn't it amazing how DNA can last for 1 million years? What they should say is, they're not that old. And actually, the scientist who's a Christian, has the answer that can satisfy a true scientific conundrum. Publications are going up. You see that in 1966 there was one documenting soft tissue. You see that in 2017 there was over 80, and now there's well over 90. It's an increasing field of research. So that's soft tissue. It's scientific evidence supported a biblical worldview. That's, if you're thinking about arguments, soft tissue is an argument from incredulity. And anyone can understand it. Something like blood cells, DNA, they just can't last that long. You don't need to be a scientist. It's like as if you went into a cabin in the Rocky Mountains. Let's go back to America. You go into a cabin, the snow's falling outside, you go in there, and there's a hamburger. Hasn't been disturbed for 50 years, and the hamburger's still there, and the meat's still there, and it's still warm, and there's a glass of milk. You would conclude that was someone's cabin. You wouldn't conclude, wow, it's amazing how that hamburger stayed there for 50 years. You wouldn't conclude that. You'd conclude that there was someone out in the fire. It was much younger. And in the same way, we are finding meat, protein, in dinosaur bones, which are supposed to be millions of years old. Argument from incredulity. Argument 2 is an argument from measurement. It's even more powerful. 8 minutes. I'll do it. I'm going to be quick here. Egg timer, and you all know that. Something changed into something else. With carbon-14, it changes into nitrogen-14. When something dies, it stops eating. Radiocarbon decays without being replenished. Its half-life is 5,730 years. So after 10 half-lives, there's hardly anything left. After 20 half-lives, it's immeasurable. And of course, we can check radiocarbon against known dates from the past up till about 2000 BC. And it works on bones. So for years, evolutionists wouldn't attempt, or even now, they wouldn't attempt to date a dinosaur bone, well, because they believe on their paradigm there's no carbon-14 in there. But I don't believe it's millions of years old. So we sent some off for dating. And guess what we found? C14 presence in dinosaur remains provides strong evidence against the millions of years. If dinosaurs have been extinct for that long, there could not be any C14. There is. And I've had it measured on more than one sample myself, and that thesis, PhD published work, is in the library of the University of Liverpool. There it is. May we send some medieval bones off? Percentage of modern carbon, what you'd expect, is high because they're recent. Ice Age, percentage is lower. Why? Because they're less recent. Pleistocene, then dinosaur samples, it's much, much lower, but it's still there. And that is an argument from, not from incredulity, but an argument from measurement, that the C14 is proof that they're not millions of years old. I'm going quickly. You can ask about these things later if you wish. Okay, so scientific evidence, we've got soft tissue, we've got carbon dating. Original biochemistries in fossils worldwide. This is some found in the UK, and we find a squid found in Salisbury, and when the ink was dissolved in acetone, it was able to draw the squid with its own ink. It's called a Jurassic squid. Jurassic ink. And of course the thinking is, how could this squid be preserved, its ink be preserved for that long? Ink is ink, it just goes away, doesn't it? But this squid was able to be drawn with its own ink. There's where the fossils are found. That's for you, Andy. The dinosaurs show original biochemistry throughout the geological column. So there's the so-called deep time of the geological column. Well, the point here is they're not only all over the world, the soft tissues all the way through the column. They're geographically ubiquitous and they're geologically ubiquitous. Do you get what that's saying? These soft tissues are all over the place and they're all the way through time. So let's add an 8th fact. They died suddenly, they died catastrophically, they're found worldwide, they're buried in groups, they died in flood conditions, they died at high altitudes, their bones contained soft tissue, and they died not long ago. I think at that point we could leave it, Andy, if you're short of time. And
not that short of time. I just wanted time for discussion.
Yes, indeed.
That's what I was after.
You give me a time, I'll finish.
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Well,
There we go. This is the key slide. Oh, sorry. I'm just going back. Let me give you a little video.
The book of Genesis describes a catastrophic worldwide flood. Is there any evidence that floodwaters covered the entire earth? There certainly is. Genesis says that all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Today, oceans cover about 70% of the globe. On average, they are much deeper than the continents are high. It looks like the water from the flood is still here. Continuous water-deposited rock layers span whole continents. That doesn't happen with local or regional floods today. These widespread layers contain most of the world's fossils. At least 95% of these fossils are marine invertebrates like clams, and we find them mixed with land or swamp creatures like tree shrews, insects, turtles, birds, and dinosaurs. It looks like an enormous but short-lived flood buried them all with fast-moving water. The Earth's surface has flat areas, but also valleys and mountains. Some of the highest mountain peaks, including Everest, have fossilized marine creatures. The Great Flood likely formed many water-deposited layers on the ancient ocean floor and caused tectonic upheavals that buckled those layers into mountain ranges. And when the large amounts of water quickly drained away, it formed steep-walled valleys between the mountaintops. Most geologists say that the extensive rocks and fossils must have taken great lengths of time to form. But this extends today's slow-paced local geologic processes into the past by overlooking Earth's evidence for fast-paced catastrophic worldwide flood effects. Vast layers, fossil graveyards, and mountains and valleys all around the world point to a massive watery catastrophe. And
the dinosaurs. The flood really happened. Genesis, Moses, and the Gospels, Jesus, both teach this. Science and history confirm the biblical account, and the flood was God judging this world for its sin. It was sudden, it was catastrophic, it was worldwide, it was by water, and it was not long ago. But the flood also shows God's grace. The ark is a wonderful picture of salvation. Everybody on board the ark and every creature on board the ark was saved. And one of the greatest pictures of Christ in the Old Testament is the ark. He bore God's judgment against sin on the cross. He was battered, he was bruised, he was beaten, he was smitten by God and afflicted for man's sin. And all those in him are saved. Sinners, big sinners, little sinners, all those in him are saved by trusting in Christ. And this story of the flood, which is attested by history and by science and by the Bible, speaks to us not only of a judgment, a God who hates sin, but a God who is willing to punish his own son that we might be saved. That's what we learn from dinosaurs. Thank you.